Welcome to the Thriving Misfits, the podcast where we celebrate resilience, embrace diversity, and challenge norms. I'm your host, Fiona Young, and today we have an extraordinary guest with us, Tina Arcilla, a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion at Manulife in APAC. Tina is dedicated to empowering employees to create a working environment where everyone is accepted, valued, and included. Before her current role, she was the head of Community Business, Diversity and Inclusion Asia Network, or called DIAN. And she's leading a network committed to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion across Asia. Over a decade at Community Business, Tina's impactful work took her across the continent, conducting research, workshops, and speaking engagements on critical issues like DEI strategy, culture, race, gender, disability, LGBTQ+, and broader workplace inclusion. So join us as we delve into Tina's journey, her insights on creating inclusive workplaces, and the transformative power of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So welcome, Tina.
Hi, Fiona. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so great that we have stayed connected. Now it's been, I would say, almost 8 years that we have known each other. And I really needed your help in 2016 when we established our first women's network in Shell, Hong Kong. And you were there as a guest speaker trying to convince everyone that it is so important that we had this network. So here we are 8 years later, still connected and working together, just in a different capacity.
Yeah, I think it's great. The work that I get to do in diversity, equity, and inclusion connects me with some really interesting, some great people. And so, yeah, I love staying connected with the fascinating people, yourself included.
And it's not only that we are connecting with regards to DEI, we also connect on a very personal level. We both love music, and you especially, you're a drummer. My husband is also an avid drummer. So something that you have both in common, and you love music. And now, given your passion for DEI, if you had to create a theme song for your DEI initiatives at Manulife, what genre would it be, and which culturally diverse instruments would you feature to make it the ultimate anthem for workplace inclusion?
I love this song. This question. And I think in terms of a song, I might go for a percussion ensemble. So given that I'm a drummer, as you mentioned, it would just be like a drum circle with different instruments. And what's beautiful about that is that percussions can be really anything. So people immediately think of drums, but it can also be chimes. The piano is also considered a percussion instrument. Oh, okay. So it's quite a diverse set of instruments that you could bring along. And in terms of creating that song, I would leave it to the people in the circle to contribute whatever riffs they want to include into the song. And I think that's exactly how DEI goes.
Oh, yeah. And it's just so accessible for everyone, because even for Reuven, my son, right, 1.5 years old, already sending him to music class just to get that exposure. And they love percussions, right? It's just so accessible for everyone.
Absolutely. Anyone and everyone can join and enjoy.
Yeah, right. Now, here's another fun question for you. So imagine you have to explain the concept of inclusion using only a playlist. What would be your top 3 songs and why?
Oh, that is a challenging question. I'll give it a go. I think the first one would be Born This Way by Lady Gaga. I think that gets to the very basic concept that there are a lot of things that we are born with inherently, different traits and preferences, who we are. A lot, of course, is developed as we grow and interact with other people. But there's some things that we are born with, and that song is really about accepting people's differences. The second song would be a classic from the Beatles, All You Need Is Love. And I think when we talk of DEI, a lot of times it's so intellectual, there's so much jargon, And if you go to the very heart of it, it is, pun intended, all about love. It's about getting to know people and valuing them and loving the people around you in your community. The third
And also
one,
self-love, right? Self-love is so important.
that is true. Absolutely. And it's the one that we forget the most ourselves. Um, the last one, I'm having a hard time, but maybe Heal the World. I'm revealing my age. But Heal the World, I think, acknowledges that there are a lot of things that are wrong with the world. And, when we talk DEI, a lot of times it's all about harmony and kumbaya. It's like all the best and positive things, but recognizing that there are a lot of negative things that are happening, that there are people who are being marginalized and forgotten, is the first step to understanding that there is a problem and we need to find a solution to that together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's not only always having a positive mindset, that positive thinking, but as you said, we just need to create that awareness that, yeah, there's lots of challenges in the world. And if we are more aware of them, then we can actually find initiatives and things to do something about them, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now your journey has taken you across so many different roles, so many different countries. You are of Filipino heritage. So how does this heritage actually influence your approach to DEI in the workplace?
I love this question because I think anytime we do work around DEI, it's important to bring in ourselves, the uniqueness that we bring in to our perspectives to DEI. And it took me a while to think of this, but I've always thought about community and our role in it and supporting others within that community. And the more I tried to articulate it, I realized I already had the word for it, which is kapwa, which is a Filipino word that means basically that, it's what do we owe to each other? And it's not necessarily a transactional obligation. It's more of understanding that role that you play within the community and giving of yourself in terms of support and service to others. And so the work that I do around DEI is really about getting people to understand that it's not just about the self. The self is important, but it's our relationships to others. And I think that is quite an Asian approach, generally Asian approach to DEI. It's about others and ourselves in the context of the community.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. And now your academic background is so diverse. You studied political economy with a focus on international relations and development. So how does this multidisciplinary perspective influence your work in the corporate governance and also DAI? How do you see it as part of your professional identity?
Well, I didn't know this back then. I had no idea that there was such a thing as DEI, but DEI is inherently multidisciplinary, and that so happened to be the same with the course that I took. And what the value of political economy and international relations is about recognizing that people and societies are complex. It takes a lot more study, and while models are useful, they're simple and they simplify this complexity. It's recognizing that we're only looking at a small portion of what exists and trying to simplify for the sake of explaining one thing in that interconnected web. Another thing that I learned in university is that, well, the more you learn, the more you know that you know nothing, right? It's that idea that there's so much going on, and that I think humbles you. And that's necessary in DEI. There's so much going on. And you do have to look to others within the community, and even outside of DEI. It's not just this inner circle of DEI gurus. It's beyond that. You need to know that you can learn from every single person around you. But despite that complexity, one thing that I think I have learned over the past decade or so is that there are more things that we have in common with each other, despite our differences. And that background in school of doing the research and finding common threads comes into play, because now this is what you do in DEI. It's about bridging gaps. It's about finding things that are common, finding things we can laugh about together or cry over together.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's really about having this genuine curiosity, learning from each other. And that's why I love doing this podcast. Like every single guest brings in so much wealth of experience, and I can learn so much from them having all these conversations. Like you said, DEI is evolving. It's not static at all. And we become so much more aware. And yeah, I think it's so lovely to be able to have all these amazing guests on my podcast. Definitely something that I continuously learn from. Now, you are the driver of DEI at Manulife here in APAC. What are some of the most rewarding aspects of your role? And also, there must be some challenges that you're facing whenever it comes to fostering an inclusive workplace environment. So, what are some of the most rewarding aspects, and also what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Funnily, the answer to that question, to both questions, is the same thing. Most rewarding thing, it's never the same job twice. The most challenging, it's never the same job twice. So I like being challenged. I like varying my schedule and my routine. I don't like, doing routine things. I like innovating. And that is at the core of DEI. Yes, you set up processes and systems, but there's always something that isn't covered, and you'll have to adjust. Or, as I said, it's quite a broad and interconnected topic. And so there's always something different to focus on, or something that you thought you had sorted out, and then there's a new perspective that comes along. And so that is the rewarding thing. You can contribute to the discussion, you can evolve it, you can change it as the understanding of a topic or a dynamic grows. But I think the challenging thing is that it can get quite tiring, I would say, especially when the thing that changes are situations that people around you get into, and you get asked for advice. And of course, if you're a very empathetic person, that can kind of drain you. And so the challenge there is keeping that resilience and making sure that you have enough for yourself to give of yourself to others.
Now, you talk about resilience, so important, and I can resonate with that as a coach, right? So sometimes we have so much empathy that we take on their burden at times, even though we don't want to. I guess that's kind of like human nature. So how do you take care of yourself then? How do you relax? How do you decompress?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it's music. I love drumming. It's something that I discovered 6 years ago. And so part of that love for music and community it's come together, basically. I am an organizer for a group called Free Jam Hong Kong. And the concept is basically we're at a location and we have instruments there, and we have people come up and request to do a song, whether it's singing or playing an instrument, or both.
Yeah.
And the idea is they come up and they say, okay, I can play the guitar for this song. I can't sing though. And somebody will say, I can sing. I know that song. Somebody will say, I don't know how it goes, but I can try it on drums. I can listen to it for a few seconds. And it becomes an instant band. And the beauty of it is that it's quite diverse, the group of people that comes along, but it's always a fun experience, and it's quite a supportive community. And that gives me energy. I'm quite an introvert, and so it's difficult to maintain energy when you're surrounded by people. But because we're so focused on the music, I don't get as tired. It's really about creating something together and connecting at that level, even if you don't speak the same language. We've had people from all over, tourists who just walk by and hear us playing music, and they just join in. And that really energizes me. In addition to that, gym. Absolutely love the gym. I think physical health and mental health go hand in hand. So at least once a week, I'll do something at the gym, or more if I have time to go out in the outdoors.
Are you still doing the Filipino? What is it? Is it arnis?
Arnis, martial arts. Not so much now. I think I'm starting it up again soon. But that's the trouble with being a serial hobbyist. You have all these things, so much stuff in the apartment just piled up. But no, I love Filipino martial arts. It's, again, one of those things that brings me energy, besides the fact that it's something that I know people in the Philippines have done over centuries. It's also a way of connecting with people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love doing that with you. So I hope to see you again soon in Victoria Park. All right. Now, you were previously heading community business DIAN network for an NGO. Can you share with us one initiative or one project that you worked on that you're particularly proud of?
It's quite hard to narrow it down to one, but in general, I think it's really about the research. I started that job more than a decade ago, and at that time, the discussion around DEI was really driven from the West, specifically from the US. And a lot of the data, a lot of the perspectives were from there. And the idea of translating it to the local context was just seen as, well, translate the language without changing anything at all about the content, or replacing the word US with Hong Kong. But as we know, it cannot be that way, and the approach to things can vary significantly between North America and Asia, and even within Asia, it's so different. And so the research that we did was really going market by market. Of course, we would talk about, and quotes, Asian perspective on what DEI is, just in terms of broad strokes. But we went down into market level perspectives. And even there, we were saying that this barely scratches the surface. And so for anyone to say that this is our Asia strategy and to leave it at that, it's clearly a pointless and futile attempt at that, because we need to look at very, very specific dynamics within each market. And it's not just language, and some things do not translate. Yes, there are gender issues in the West versus whatever market in Asia. But sometimes there are dynamics that go beyond just gender and disability that we cannot even explain without a full hour of saying, this is the history to this, and this is why. When you say one thing here, it won't land, or there's a different emotional tug. Yeah. All that to say, it was the Asian-focused research that I did back then, which, of course, was very helpful for me in terms of just learning all about what was going on across Asia in terms of DEI.
Yeah. This is also something that I've experienced. As you know, I'm highly focused on generational inclusion. And back in the days when Simon Sinek had his viral video about millennials, or rather complaining and labeling millennials in, I think, 2017, I just went up to a few young millennials in Hong Kong and I asked them, hey, you've watched this video. Do you resonate with that? And they said, no, not at all. They see themselves as much more hardworking. There's a lot of pressure in terms of, parental influence, societal influence. And whenever I looked at some of the Big Four studies about millennials in the workplace, they just focus a lot on the Western Hemisphere. And even if I find something that's related to Asia, and then I look at the response rate for Hong Kong, it's just like 100 responses, right? And that's definitely not representative. So yeah, that's one of the things that I also felt needs to be looked into. And we partnered up with ASEC back in the days. And now actually this year we're relaunching it for Gen Z based in APAC. So we're hoping to get more responses in that space because talking about millennials is so old already, right? We now need to look into the Gen Z and maybe even Gen Alpha. So that's really going to be so interesting.
100%. And I'm really looking forward to that. It's definitely the topic of conversation here at Manulife. We joke about it a lot about how we literally speak a different language, where we're trying to learn all these new terms that are coming up.
Yep.
And part of learning those terms is learning the culture as well. It's a totally different culture that Generation Alpha is building. They're interacting with technology differently. They're interacting with each other differently. And so I think there needs to be a lot more study into that. So really looking forward to that research.
All right. Definitely going to share it with everyone who's interested to know more. Now, we both are in the D&I space because we have that passion. This is like something I would say is part of our purpose in life. And not everyone may share that sentiment. But nevertheless, we need people to rally around DEI initiatives and be genuine about it, right? It's not just a marketing tool. I've seen some companies, they're just leveraging on it as a marketing tool because they know that young talents, they're all about inclusion. So how do you help your colleagues, especially even frontliners or new joiners, younger people? How do you make sure that everyone in all levels of the organization can not only empathize with the strategy of DEI, but actually play an active role to embrace inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a really big challenge because in a company like Manulife, we have several thousand people spanning the region, spanning the globe. So I think one of the main things is meeting people where they're at. And I'm sure many people have said this because it's true. We cannot force people to take on and embrace DEI in the way that we understand it, in the way that we value it. So part of that is understanding people's motivations and their backgrounds and where they're coming from, understanding that there's a level of fear as well, because people hold values very close to their hearts. And anything that challenges that is a threat. And so if you say anything that attacks something like their religious beliefs, for example, there's no way to really communicate without breaking that fear barrier. And so letting them know that you're not making them change their mind. And I think a lot of people approach these discussions as it's a debate that needs to be won. I need to make my point and you need to agree with me. And that way this conversation is a success. I don't see it that way at all. And I think a lot of people in the DI space, after years of trying to change mindsets, it's understanding that you have to understand people's fears and motivations and then present things in a way that they would understand and maybe see the value of. And we may fail. They might say, I don't agree. And that's fine. I think even that process of having a conversation without being the stereotypical, in quotes, woke DEI champion helps. The amount of surprise that I encounter whenever I talk to somebody and they say, oh, I've never heard somebody in DEI say it that way. Well, I'm like, well, it's because I'm not using the typical jargon and phrases and being forceful about something. I'm just stating facts, my beliefs, presenting it, and then maybe acknowledging where I would agree with another person's viewpoint. It's actually just about having conversations where you actually connect with each other rather than score points off each other. But beyond that, I think once you have, like in Manulife, people who are so passionate about DEI, but maybe are unclear about how to go forward. It's about clarifying the message and the objectives. Unfortunately, that may mean limiting a few things that are outside of scope. But it's kind of necessary. If you have a big organization, you say, that is great. Let's pivot that so that it clearly aligns with the organization's objectives. And, maybe that's a really good idea for next year. We can, change things up a bit. And so, for example, for us, the priority areas have shifted. So I joined more than 2 years ago. And early this year, we decided actually the focus now is really going to be on psychological safety, nothing new. But this is now where we feel the organization has shifted. We're also looking a bit more at interfaith discussions, because seeing what's going on in the world, this is where it needs to shift. And that's come from what we're seeing, but also what we're hearing from employees. And so making sure that we're clear on the objectives, but also being open and seeing where the opportunity is to maybe expand or pivot a little bit.
I think that's great that you say that, because it's not only us being woke, but we need to bring people on board, right? And having that conversation, I think, is going to help us get to the goal what we're trying to achieve. Now, we have a lot of viewers, listeners who identify themselves as a misfit. They don't feel that sense of belonging. What is your top tip for a misfit in order for them to really embrace their uniqueness, embrace their differences as a strength?
Oh, that is quite tough, because I think misfits come in all shapes and sizes. And this piece of advice may not go well with somebody of a certain type of misfit. I would say what has worked for me is that I try to share of myself in relatable ways. Sometimes I may come across as overly passionate about something. I can go down a monologue about Filipino martial arts, and people will just be like, okay, that's interesting. But I think over the years, what I've tried to do is share a bit in a relatable way, something that they might find interesting, and kind of gauge their interest, and then change the topic if they're not too interested in something, which is difficult for me to pull back and get out of that rabbit hole of just focusing on so many details and fun facts and trivia. And I think part of it as well is not being so self-conscious about how you come across. And it takes a long time to be comfortable in your own skin. So I know that not everyone finds me fascinating and what I share interesting, and that's okay. I think we have to remember that, at least for me, I used to tend to obsess about, oh, why did I say that? What are people thinking? Why did I do that? I shouldn't have said that. Rather than focusing on that, just know that somebody is probably misinterpreting your intentions, or thinking you're strange or weird, or like, I don't want to hang out with that person, and that's fine. I think the process of sharing isn't about impressing people. It's about finding the people you click with and building that community with them. And along the way, you will meet people who will think you're very strange, very odd, and will disagree with you. But that's okay. They are not, in quotes, your people. You find your community.
Great. Now, that concludes today's inspiring episode of the Thriving Misfits. We've been honored to have Tina with us today, sharing her invaluable insights and experiences in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion at Manulife, but also beyond. So Tina's dedication to creating an environment where everyone is accepted, valued, and included is really inspirational for me. If you have found today's conversation as enlightening as I did, make sure to subscribe to the Thriving Misfits on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube to stay updated on our latest episodes. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey, and we can't wait to see you back soon. Remember, each one of us really has the power to make a difference in creating a much more inclusive world. So until next time, keep thriving, Misfits.